Good morning, student. How are you? I hope all is well with you. Today we continue with a new chapter, that is objects and classes. As last time I have told you that I am going to record the video for you to explain the object and classes concept. Then eventually you attempt some questions. So let us go back and define the concept of object-oriented programming. So as you can see, the object-oriented programming involves programming with objects. Then what is this object? From the environmental viewpoint, anything that is very near to us, we simply call it an object. Then in the computer point view, an object represents an entity in the real world. So it can be anything, for example, like a student, like a class, like a car, like a circle, even some concept of taxation like loan and rest. So an object has a unique identity, state, and behavior. So what is the state of an object? The state of an object consists of a set of data type. You remember our different data types? We have integer, we have double, we have char, and rest. And this data type is also known as property of the object. So with their own current values. Object also has a behavior, and the behavior of object is defined by a set of methods in which they are invoked to perform a certain task. So let us see graphically the architecture of an object. For example, here you can see we have a class name, circle, so we are giving an example of a cycle. Throughout this object-oriented programming, we begin with the example of a cycle because it's a simple example in which we can just be able to compute the area of that cycle using the radius of the cycle. So here in this class, we have the cycle and we have the data fields, which is radius is. So we have to define the radius of the cycle. And we also have to define a method. You can see what is called get area. So we have to define a method for calculating the area, where if you use the term get area, then it will invoke this method and calculate the area of this cycle. So if you have a class and we have an object cycle, then we can be able to compute the area of that cycle using various radius. For example, here we have radius is 10, here we have radius is 25, the last one is we have radius 125. So an object has both the state and the behavior. What is the state? The state of the object defines the object, and the behavior defines what the object does. Then what are classes? Classes can be defined as a construct in which the objects are defined using the data type of the same object. For example, if we have different classes, then the constructs define the object in terms of the same type. For example, a Java class uses a variable to define data fields and methods to define behaviors. In addition, a class provides a special type of method. This method is called a constructor. A constructor. So we can have different levels of constructor in a class, which also invoke to construct objects from the class. If you have a class cycle, we can have different constructors in that class to invoke that, to construct objects of that class. So this is a skeletal example of a Java code using cycle class. If you look at it, this is our comment. This line says the radius of this cycle. So is what? We already declared double as radius, which is 1.0. So this is data field. So here, if you look at it, we have two constructors in this block. So we have the first one, which is cycle. It is empty. Then we have the second one, the second constructor, which is cycle. Then it has an argument and a parameter. So we have double new radius. Then radius is equals to new radius. So which means it is trying to override the previous or default radius of that cycle. Then lastly, we have a method for what? For calculating the area of that cycle. So double get area, you see, is a method. So, and this method returns a value which is the area of the cycle. So you see the return time, and you have radius times 3.14159, which is the value of a pi. So if you look, somebody may ask why this constructor. Okay, let me continue. UML diagram of the class. So if you look at this, we have a diagram with the name of the cycle, which is class name. Then we have the radius of double type, which is data field. Then we have the constructors and the method portion. So the UML diagram of a class is subdivided into three. One is the name of the class. Two is the field, data field, that is the radius, the values in which they can be used to calculate the area of that cycle. Then we have the last portion, which is the portion where we defined our constructors and the methods that are invoked to calculate the area of the cycle and sometimes to set values of the radius. So for example, here we have cycle number 1, we have cycle number 2, we have cycle number 3, all using the UML notations as objects. So let us have a simple example defining classes and creating objects. So we are going to use the same cycle class. So for example, let us call this class from the book listing 9.1, because it's chapter 9, test simple class.java. So as usual, we have our public class test simple cycle, which is the name of the class, then followed by the main method, which is necessary, we have to write it in order to run our program. Then we have this command for what? Creating a cycle with radius 1, radius equals to 1. So you see, we begin to start creating a cycle objects. The first cycle object is we have to use what is called simple cycle. Then this is the name of the cycle 1. Then we have to also use new keyword to create an object of simple cycle. So we have simple cycle, cycle 1 is equal to new simple cycle, no any argument. So we print this system.out.print the area of the cycle of radius. We know the radius because we already said radius is what? 1 plus cycle.radius plus is plus cycle.get area. So these two things are methods that will be defined eventually. But now, because we are trying to print this statement, we just invoke the method cycle.radius and cycle.get area. So we are going to see this method shortly. So now we also create another object of cycle with radius 25. So we use the simple cycle object 2, and we create the new object simple cycle. Then we pass the parameter, which is 25. Then we also print. We use the get. We use cycle2.radius to get what? The radius. Then we use cycle dot get area to compute the area of that cycle of with radius 25. Then the third one, we also create the third cycle using radius 125. We use the same two methods, cycle3.radius and cycle3.get area. Then we can also modify the radius of this cycle by setting the new radius. So in this case, we also use another method. So here is we use cycle2.radius. Then we what? Plus cycle2.get area. So this time around we pass a value which is 100. Let us see. If we look at line number 27, so here is we are defining the cycle class with two constructors. You remember the class object is divided into three: the name of the class, the data, then we have the constructors and the methods. So here we define the first constructor. Okay, class simple cycle, it has nothing, double radius 1. This one is what? Class simple cycle data field. Okay, then no data field, because this is the class cycle, that the class simple cycle. You know, previously we have here, okay, sorry, here we have two classes actually. So the first class on top is test simple cycle class. Test simple cycle class is telling you that we have a class that has different objects and we can create object of this class. So now we are creating the simple cycle class. The simple cycle class is the class that has the methods and is the same class that has the constructors. So here is the simple cycle class with what? With data field, that is double radius. Now we are defining our radius as what? Double. So previously we also said we are printing radius of what? Which is equals to 1. Then subsequently we print the area of the cycle with radius equals to is it 25? Then even 25. Then we also calculate, we change the value to be 100. Okay, so let's follow these constructors. So the first constructor, which is simple cycle, there is no any argument, but we declare the value of radius equals to 1. So that is the first constructor that we use the print statement to print 1. To use 1 to print the area of the cycle. Then we create the second constructor of that cycle. So here we have to create another constructor, simple cycle, but this simple cycle, it has a parameter and it has an argument. So the parameter is new radius, which means that we are trying to override the previous radius of 1 with the new radius. So radius is equals to new radius. We are done with this constructor. So now we create a method that returns the value of the area of the cycle. So double get area. So this method returns the area using radius times math.pi. Math.pi, because we know the value of pi. Then we in this program we are also trying to calculate the perimeter of that cycle. And the method for calculating the perimeter of that cycle is given by 2 times radius times math.pi. Then we also have another method for setting the value of radius. So in this method, we set a value of radius for this cycle. So this is a void method because it sets voids set radius double new what? Oh, this is not returning a value. That is why it is void method. The one that returns a value is not void. They are most of the time they are static, so it's like double get perimeter, double get area. So this one doesn't return a value, but it is setting the new value of the radius. So void set radius double new region.